Hi, it's nice to see you again. This is the second part of the 1D signal properties. And now we would like to discuss about feature extraction. The features that we are going to extract are coming from the time domain representations, the frequency domain representations, and the combinations of time domain and frequency domain representation. Okay, now we have done with the basic properties. Now we discuss about the basic processing steps. Now this uh, will lead to the assignment number 1. Okay, so the basic processing step would be when we acquire the data. I will be fast here because I already have discussed the basic processing step before, and then we do some signal enhancement, noise reduction, filtering if it is needed, then normalization again if it is needed. It could be the amplitude or the time or size, and then normally we have to segment signal by blocking the signals. We divided the whole signals into frames. Now the length of the frames is really something that we have to consider, and some research suggests to use 30 milliseconds for audio processing, but you would try, for example, to 50 milliseconds or so. Okay, so now you could imagine that if you have 1 second samples. Now 1 second means 1000 milliseconds. And if your block size or the frame size is 50 milliseconds, then it means that 1 second sample would be divided into 50 frames or 50 blocks. Now then you would extract features of each frame. So in 1 second data, you would extract 20 times because you have 20 frames. You could extract the time domain features, you could extract the frequency domain features, you could also extract the time and frequency domain features. It is really up to you which features you want to use, but we have to consider the application and also the performance of our method. Then we do some feature matching or similarity measurements. Just look back at the basic processing step that we have discussed before at the beginning of this course. Okay, the feature matching could be neural network, K nearest neighbor, sorry, and here is the nearest neighbor, not neural network. K nearest neighbor, then nearest mean classifier. We could use correlation if our approach is template matching. We could use cosine coefficient. We could also use the artificial neural network. Now we have this example of the signal recorded using microphone on an application, recording application. The record is only for 1 second. So from this to there is only 1 second. The sampling rate is 8,000 sample per second. So remember, this means that it is not a high quality voice, but it is a telephone quality voice. Now, our features are from the time domain, frequency domain, or the combination of the two. Now we will start with, or we will begin with time domain features. So in time domain features, here are shown three features. One is called the average energy. The second one is called the zero crossing rate, or ZC. The other one is the silent ratio, or SR. How do we calculate this? Okay, this formula should be applied to any frame. So if you have 20 frames, then you have to use this formula 20 times, once for each frame. Now, in each frame, you have a number of samples, digital samples. Okay, and the number of samples is denoted by n. So let's take the example from the previous one. We have 8,000 samples. It is from a 1 second voice. If we divided that into 10 frames, it means that each frame consists of 800 samples, right? So the equation here, it means that to calculate E, then we have to add from sample number 0 up to sample number 799. For each sample, we square the values. Okay, it's sample number 1, the value is 1, then x square, it means x1, sample number 1, square 1. If sample number 2, 3, then square this to become 3 squares. Okay, so it is a simple thing. Which is the one which is not simple is that from the format of the data, you would have to read the data into become an array. Now there is a library for that, so you could use the library in your programming language. Okay, so this is the average energy. So what does the average energy describe the signal? It describes the strength of the signal at that particular frame. So the dynamics from frames to frames are well recorded using this average energy. Now, if let's say 1/10 of a second frame is too large, you could reduce it to become a smaller again. Okay, and then zero crossing rate basically is the number of crossing from positive to negative. So if you have a signal like this one, this is the signal that, let's say, you have okay, let's suppose this is one frame from here to here, sorry, to here. Then how many crossings are there? Now if I draw the if like I can show you that this is the crossing, okay, from positive to negative, and this one is also a crossing from negative to positive. So it means that you have two crossings in your frame. So basically in this case, zero crossing rate, then 2 divided by the number of samples that you have. Now, you can measure in terms of samples or you can measure in terms of times. So you could say 2 crossing per 1/10 of a second or 2 crossing per 800 samples. Now the formula that is described here, the number is divided not by n but divided by 2n, simply because the sign gave you a +1 or -1, so that, for example, in this particular area here, from +1, this is SGNX, and it means -1. Then SGNX n -1 is +1. So it's -1 minus +1. It means that -2. So you have 2 divided by 2. Since one's crossing will contribute 2. Okay, now what is the silence ratio? The silence ratio is periods. So it is a ratio of periods and the total length of the audio piece. So where is the silent period? Now, remember on our first example, on our previous example about an applications that it is applied in a quiet room, any signal below 20 dB would be considered as silence. Any signals above 20 would be considered as non-silent. Now, if I draw a picture here, let's say this is the silent area. Then we have the area where it is silent here. We don't have the silence here because on the second crossing, because it is directly from non-silent negative to non-silent positive. So for this example, it is the length is only 2 signals divided by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 in this example. So that is the these are the features in the time domain. Now, if you read from other textbook, you will find other features again generated based on these very basic features. Now the next one is the features in the frequency domains. Okay, we have the bandwidth as the features, the energy distribution, and the harmonicity. Pitch is not considered a feature. Well, it is features, however, it is subjective. So we could not measure using any existing device. So what is bandwidth? The definition is simply the highest minus the lowest signals. However, there is for effective bandwidth, it has to be at least 3 dB above silence. So if I have to draw again a signal in the frequency domain, I think it's better just to draw in the it is right, frequency domain. The vertical axis is the power. Let's say that 3 dB is this dotted red line. Now we have this signal like this one. Now any signal below the dotted line, it means that this the signals is considered as in the silent area. So when we calculate the bandwidth, then the actual bandwidth is only from this part to this part. So this is the bandwidth. Okay, where do we use the bandwidth information? Well, it could be, for example, in a pre-processing of a signal. Okay? Just to make sure whether this sound is coming from voice of a human, or is it coming from, let's say, music. Now, if the bandwidth is high, above 10,000, let's say, then it is not possible that it is a human speaking, because human voice, the bandwidth is only 7,500 hertz, and so the bandwidth larger than that indicates that it is not a human speech. Now the second one is the energy distribution. Okay, we could use the full spectrum, that is all the numbers on this spectrum, or we could also use only the lower band, higher band, or spectral centroid, which is sometimes called the brightness of the voice. Okay, so now if you use only the spectral centroid, then it would be, well, I would guess would be around here, right? So it is only one number. But it is not energy distribution. It means that, well, it represents energy distribution because this is only one frame. Remember that we have so many frames in our data. So the variability of this spectral centroid across frames to frames would also give us the what is the description or the characteristic of the sound. So okay, however, the spectrum is very detailed one. Now the last one is the harmonicity. Okay, let's suppose that we have a signal that looks like this one. Okay. Okay, so this is the frequency. This is the power. Now we notice that there are peaks here, there, and there, and normally the distance between peaks are the same. Like in the text here, and the first part is, let's say, fundamental frequency is 400. Then the first octave is 800, followed by 1200, 1600, and so on. Now we could use the ratio between the height of the fundamental frequency or the power of the fundamental frequency and the first octave, second octave, and so on as the features which distinguishes one sound from the other sound. Remember that not all the sound has harmonics like this one, but musical instruments normally has. Okay, now can we combine the features from the time and frequency domain? Yes. So the name of that is the spectrogram, and again, spectrogram could be generated from many spectrograms also. So it gives you a view of a one-dimensional signal in the form of an image. Okay. So the spectrogram shows the relation between the time and also the frequency and amplitude. Normally, the frequency is shown along the vertical axis, the times along the horizontal axis, and the amplitude or the energy is the cell value. And intensity or power of the signal is indicated by a grayscale. This is, however, not necessarily grayscale. It could be other monochrome color. Okay, so I will show you the mechanics, how to get the spectrogram. So remember that our signal consists, our data first have to be divided into number of frames. Sorry, I am using pieces here, but the proper name is frames or blocks. You can either use frames or blocks. And in our previous example, our signals is divided into 10 blocks, 10 frames. In this example, our signal is divided only to this is one block, one frame, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's divided to 5 frames. Now for each 5 frames, we have to convert the signal into the frequency domain by using the fast Fourier transform. So we apply fast Fourier transform from the spatial domain representation, this is one frame, to become a spectrum. So the vertical axis is the power, the horizontal axis is the frequency. Now for each power along this spectrum, we map onto the first column. So the first frequency is mapped here, the second is mapped there, the third is mapped there, and so on. So we have one line here, one column failed. So each spectrum will be mapped into a column of the spectrogram. Now, after we have done with the first frame, then we do the second frame, the same thing. Now, convert into spectrum using the FFT, and then from FFT, map again to the second column here. Okay, and so on. So then at the end, we will have the spectrogram. Now, I will show you the example of a spectrogram here. This is an example of spectrogram. The frequency range from 0 up to a little bit more than 5,000, and the time is from 0 up to 0.9 second. So it is about 900 millisecond data, and the spectrum looks like this one. So it's not black and white, it is a color, but you know what higher frequency component is expressed in. You can of course use the grayscale only if you would like. Okay, so then with this one, we are done for the first part of this one-dimensional data, and so I could start with the first assignment. Now We will discuss more about the signal processing on the next meeting. So this is the assignment. The data is a one-dimensional data, and you have to do the classification. So an example of this would be, let's say you are a person who likes pets. You have cats, you have let's say birds. Probably you have a lovebird, you have a terkuku, you have puter, you have whatever. Now you can record your cats when it is meowing. You can record your bird's song, and you divided your data into two categories. One is the training data, or the data that you would like to use it as a reference if you are not using the ANN approaches or any data with any method with the training. Okay, and then the second part of the data will be used for testing. So it is very loose assignment. You could use any features. The time domain features is allowed to be used, and the frequency domain features also acceptable. You choose yourself what kind of features you would like to use. Your data has to be blocks into frames, and how many number of frames for each sample, it is really up to you. If you have a sample bird song, the first sample is 1 second, the second sample is 2 seconds, for example. You could cut the 2 seconds into the 2 second data into two pieces of 1 second data. Okay, well, at least has to have two classes. So if in the case of the animal, then at least there has to be two animals voice. Now you would also you may also use data, spoken data. Let's say you pronounce number, you pronounce student, you pronounce name, you pronounce title. Consider that as classes in your data. So in this example, you would have 4 classes. Class 1 is for number, for example. Class 2 is for student. Class 3 is for name. Class 4 is for title. Now you have to pronounce this several times, because some of this pronunciation will be used to build the reference data or the training data, and then the rest will be used for testing data. Okay, now the report. It should consist of the cover, a simple thing. It consists of title, name, student ID number. The thing that has to be there. Well, nice cover or it's not nice cover, it doesn't really matter for me. And the main thing is consists your name, your student ID number, and the title. And then the more important thing is about the body of your report, which has to consist of introduction, where you give your introduction about what is this assignment about, and then your method, your experimental results, and discussion. The experimental result and discussion could be one section, but it could also be separated into 2 sections. So your body could either 3 sections or 4 sections. The method should describe the step by step of data processing. So how you process the data. It would be nice if you could follow the basic processing or the generic processing step. How you acquire the data, how you pre-process the data, and so on. Okay, and then the appendix. The appendix consists of your source code, but the minimum thing is only the main processes. So your language could come with many libraries, but some of them is not the main process. So for example, it's only for reading the data, generating the output, and so on. So that may not be included in the appendix. Now the submission has to be done through ELO no later than March. Sorry, it is not March 1st, but March the 3rd. So your time is 2 weeks. Okay, it's not March the 2nd, sorry, 1st, but March 3rd. So, okay, that is the course for today. Hopefully it will be useful for you for the future.